I never expected what his wife did that night. I still remember that night like it happened yesterday. The shock, the tension, the way the air felt so heavy. It wasn't the fancy hotel, the expensive drinks, or the powerful men in the room that made it unforgettable. It was what happened when the millionaire's wife walked in. Let me take you back to the beginning. I work as a business consultant, and my job requires me to attend high-profile meetings. That night, I was at an exclusive event, one of those gatherings where only the richest and most influential people in the country were invited. The man at the center of it all was Chief Okafor, a self-made millionaire known for his ruthless business tactics. But there was one thing he was even more famous for: his mistress. Chief Okafor had been married to his wife Nneka for over 15 years. She was a quiet, dark-skinned woman from the village, rarely seen at public events. Unlike the young, light-skinned mistress he paraded around, Nneka was not what society considered modern or classy. He never spoke about her, never took her to events, and if you dared ask about her, he would wave it off like she didn't exist. That night, Chief Okafor arrived with his mistress, Linda, on his arm. She wore a tight red dress, her makeup flawless, her perfume filling the air. People whispered and nodded in approval. After all, she was beautiful, the kind of woman they expected a man like him to be with. The meeting started, and Chief Okafor gave a speech about a new multi-million-dollar project. Everything was going smoothly until the doors of the hall suddenly opened. Everyone turned. There she was, Nneka. She walked in slowly, wearing a simple but elegant African gown. Her skin, dark like the night, glowed under the chandelier lights. She wasn't loud, she wasn't dramatic, but the confidence in her stride silenced the entire room. Even Linda, who had been laughing a moment ago, suddenly froze. Chief Okafor's face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Without looking at her husband, Nneka walked up to the head of the table, where the most important investors sat. She placed a folder on the table and said, "Good evening, gentlemen. I believe this will interest you." One of the investors picked up the folder and flipped through it, then another and another. The room grew tense. One of the men, a foreign investor, looked at Chief Okafor and said, "You never told us your wife owned 40% of the shares in this project." Murmurs spread across the room. My heart pounded. This was big. Nneka smiled, turning to her husband for the first time that evening. "Did you forget to mention that, my dear?" Chief Okafor looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. But the biggest shock was yet to come. Nneka turned to the investors. "I have just made a decision. I am selling all my shares to your biggest competitor." Then chaos. The investors shouted. Chief Okafor stood abruptly, knocking over his glass. Linda sat stiffly, her face pale. Everything he had built, everything he had bragged about, was crumbling right before him, and the woman he had hidden in the shadows was the one pulling the strings. But just when I thought it was over, Nneka pulled out another envelope. "And one more thing," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "I have filed for divorce. By this time tomorrow, your accounts will be frozen." Chief Okafor's eyes widened in horror. "Nneka, you can't." "I already did." She slid the papers toward him. "You forgot, my dear husband, that most of your assets are in my name. You wanted to keep me in the background, remember?" She let out a small laugh. "Well, that was your biggest mistake." The room was completely silent. Everyone was watching, waiting for what would happen next. Chief Okafor's hands trembled as he grabbed the papers. "We can talk about this, Nneka," he pleaded, his voice lower, weaker than I had ever heard it. Nneka tilted her head. "Oh, now you remember my name?" She turned to Linda, who had been sitting frozen in her chair. "And you," Nneka smiled. "Enjoy the life you so desperately wanted. You're going to need it." And with that, she walked out, her head held high, leaving her husband staring at the papers that sealed his downfall. The once mighty Chief Okafor had been destroyed, not by an enemy, not by his competitors, but by the woman he had underestimated. As I left the meeting that night, I couldn't stop thinking, what would Chief Okafor do next? Could he survive without the woman he had cast aside? But the real question is, if you were Nneka, would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Would you take revenge or simply walk away? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story.